The Whale Warriors. The Battle at the Bottom of the World to Save the Planet's Largest Mammals. By Peter Heller. Narrated by James Boles. Copyright 2007 by Peter Heller. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Peter Heller and the Robbins Office, and was produced in the year 2007 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Chapter 1. Storm. At 3 o'clock on Christmas morning, the bow of the Farley Mowat plunged off a steep wave and smashed into the trough. I woke with a jolt. The hull shuddered like a living animal, and when the next roller lifted the stern I could hear the prop pitching out of water, beating air with a juddering moan that shivered the ribs of the 180-foot converted North Sea trawler. We were 200 miles off the Adélie coast, Antarctica, in a force 8 gale. The storm had been building since the morning before. I lay in the dark and breathed. Something was different. I listened to the deep throb of the diesel engine 2 decks below and the turbulent sloshing against my bolted porthole, and felt a quickening in the ship. 15 days before, we had left Melbourne, Australia, and headed due south. The Farley Mowat was the flagship of the radical environmental group, the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. The mission of her captain, Paul Watson, and his 43-member all-volunteer crew was to hunt down and stop the Japanese whaling fleet, which was engaged in what he considered illegal commercial whaling. He had said before the trip, "We will non-violently intervene," but from what I could see of the preparations being conducted over the last week, he was readying for a full-scale attack. I dressed quickly, grabbed a dry suit and a life jacket, and ran up 3 lurching flights of narrow stairs to the bridge. Dawn. Or what passed for it in the never night of Antarctic summer, a murky gloom of wind-tortured fog and blowing snow and spray, white eruptions that tore off the tops of the waves and streamed their shoulders in long streaks of foam. When I had gone to sleep 4 hours earlier, the swells were 20 feet high and building. Now monsters over 30 feet rolled under the stern and pitched the bow wildly into a featureless sky. The timberwork of the bridge groaned and creaked. The wind battered the thick windows and ripped past the superstructure with a buffeted keening. Watson, 55, with thick, nearly white hair and beard, wide cheekbones, and packing extra weight under his exposure suit, sat in the high captain's chair on the starboard side of the bridge, looking alternately at a radar screen over his head and at the sea. He has a gentle, watchful demeanor, like a polar bear. Alex Cornelissen, 37, his Dutch first officer, was in the center at the helm, steering north-northwest and trying to run with the waves. Cornelissen looked too thin to go any place cold, and his hair was buzzed to a near stubble. "Good timing," he said to me with a tightening of his mouth that was his smile. "2 ships on the radar. The closest is under 2-mile range. If they're icebergs, they're doing 6 knots. Probably the Nishin Maru and the Esperanza," Watson said. "They're riding out the storm." He was talking about the 8,000-ton Japanese factory ship that butchered and packed the whales, and Greenpeace's flagship, which had sailed with its companion vessel, the Arctic Sunrise, from Cape Town over a month earlier, and had been shadowing and harassing the Japanese for days. Where the 5 other boats of the whaling fleet had scattered in the storm, no one could say. Watson had found, in hundreds of thousands of square miles of Southern Ocean, his prey. It was against all odds. Watson turned to Cornelissen. "Wake all hands," he said. In 1986, the International Whaling Commission, IWC, a group of 77 nations that makes regulations and recommendations on whaling around the world, enacted a moratorium on open-sea commercial whaling in response to the fast-declining numbers of Earth's largest mammals. The Japanese, who had been aggressive whalers since the food shortages following World War II, immediately exploited a loophole that allows signatories to kill a certain number of whales annually for scientific research. In 2005, Japan, the only nation other than Norway and Iceland with an active whaling fleet, decided to double its research kill from the previous year and allot itself a quota of 935 minke whales and 10 endangered fin whales. In the 2007-2008 season, it planned to kill 50 fins and 50 endangered humpbacks. Its weapon is a relatively new and super-efficient fleet comprising the 427-foot factory ship Nishin Maru, 2 spotter vessels, and 3 fast killer or harpoon boats, similar in size to the Farley Mowat. Lethal research, the Japanese say, is the only way to accurately measure whale population, health, and its response to global warming, and is essential for the sustainable management of the world's cetacean stocks. The Director General of Japan's Institute of Cetacean Research, ICR, Hiroshi Hatanaka, writes, "The legal basis for whaling is very clear. The environmental basis is even clearer. The marine resources in the Southern Ocean must be utilized in a sustainable manner in order to protect and conserve them for future generations." Though the ICR is a registered non-profit organization and claims no commercial benefit from its whaling, critics scoff, pointing out that the meat resulting from this heavily subsidized research ends up in Tokyo's famous Tsukiji fish market and on the tables at fancy restaurants. By some estimates, one fin whale can bring in $1 million. Each year, the IWC's scientific committee votes on whaling proposals, and at its annual meeting in 2005, it strongly urged Japanese whalers to obtain their scientific data using non-lethal means, and expressed strong concern over the taking of endangered fins and humpbacks from the vulnerable breeding stocks. The whalers' response was silence, then business as usual. Although this resolution is not legally binding, much of the public was outraged that the whalers would openly disregard it. The World Wildlife Fund contended that all the research could be conducted more efficiently with techniques that do not kill whales. New Zealand's Minister of Conservation, Chris Carter, among others, described the Japanese research as blatant commercial whaling. Even dissenters within Japan protested. Mizuki Takana of Greenpeace Japan pointed to a report issued in 2002 by the influential newspaper Asahi, in which only 4% of the Japanese surveyed said they regularly eat whale meat. 53% of the population had not consumed it since childhood. It is simply not true that whaling is important to the Japanese public, Takana said. The whaling fleet should not leave for the Antarctic whale sanctuary. To Watson, there is no debate. The Japanese whalers are acting commercially under the auspices of bogus research, and therefore are in violation of the 1986 moratorium. Even more controversially, the whaling occurs in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary, an internationally ordained preserve that covers the water surrounding Antarctica as far north as 40 degrees south latitude, and protects 11 of the planet's 13 species of great whales. Although research is permitted in the sanctuary, commercial whaling is explicitly forbidden. The whalers are also in clear conflict with the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species, CITES. And although the killing area in 2006 lay almost entirely within the Australian Antarctic territory, the Australians, while protesting, seemed to lack the political will to face down a powerful trading partner. It irks Watson that Australian frigates will eagerly pursue Patagonian toothfish poachers from South America in these same waters, but will turn a blind eye to the Japanese whalers. It sends a message that if you're rich and powerful, you can break the law. If the Australian Navy were doing its job, he said, we wouldn't be down here. Watson has no such diplomatic compunctions. He said, our intention is to stop the criminal whaling. We are not a protest organization. We are here to enforce international conservation law. We don't wave banners. We intervene. Whaling fleets around the world know he means business. Watson has sunk 8 whaling ships. He has rammed numerous illegal fishing vessels on the high seas. By 1980, he had single-handedly shut down pirate whaling in the North Atlantic by sinking the notorious pirate whaler Sierra in Portugal and 3 of Norway's whaling fleet at dockside. He shut down the Astrid in the Canary Islands. He sank 2 of Iceland's whalers in Reykjavik harbor and half the ships of the Spanish whaling fleet, the Isba I and Isba II. His operatives blew open their hulls with limpet mines. To his critics, he points out that he has never hurt anyone, and that he has never been convicted of a felony in any country. Chapter 2. Prelude. I had first met Watson the May before at the Telluride Mountain Film Festival. He stood in front of 1,000 people in a large auditorium and told a story. In June 1975, 65 miles off the coast of Siberia, Bob Hunter and I ran our Zodiac between a Russian whaler and a small pod of panicked, fleeing gray whales. We were the first to use a Zodiac in this way. The whalers fired a harpoon over our heads and hit a female whale in the head. She screamed. There was a fountain of blood. She made a sound like a woman's scream. Just then, one of the largest males I've ever seen slapped his tail hard against the water and hurled himself right at the Soviet vessel. Just before he could strike, the whalers harpooned him too. He fell back and swam right at us. He reared out of the water. I thought, this is it. It's all over. He's going to slam down on the boat. But instead, he pulled back. I saw his muscles pull back. It was as if he knew we were trying to save them. As he slid back into the water, drowning in his own blood, I looked into his eye and I saw recognition, empathy. What I saw in his eye as he looked at me would change my life forever. He saved my life, and I would return the favor. Silence. Watson let the image sink in like a rhetorical harpoon. He then said that the Japanese were still aggressively whaling and that he was going to go after them in his ship. He said the ocean is dying. Of 17 global fishing hotspots like the Grand Banks, 16 have collapsed beyond repair. He said there are now only 10% of the fish stocks that were in the ocean in 1950. He said we should stop, every one of us, eating all fish. There was an uncomfortable stirring in the crowd. I don't give a damn what you think of me, he thundered. My clients are the whales and the fish and the seals. If you can find me one whale that disagrees with what we're doing, we might reconsider. Watson had been among the founders and first board members of Greenpeace in 1972. His encounter with the gray whale off Siberia had been part of Greenpeace's first voyage to protect whales, and he had served as first officer. In 1977, he broke away to form the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. The legend among Greenpeacers is that he was thrown out for advocating violence and for physically separating a sealer from his club, but Watson claims he was voted off the board of directors because he opposed the board presidency of Patrick Moore. He says he started Sea Shepherd because he wanted to specialize in direct interventions against illegal exploitation of the ocean. In the last 30 years, Sea Shepherd has been running almost continuous campaigns at sea to stop illegal whaling, drift netting, long lining, dolphin slaughter, and sealing. The organization, which is based in Washington State, spends no money on fundraising, but gets donations through media attention and word of mouth. Pierce Brosnan, Martin Sheen, and Christian Bale are generous supporters, as are John Paul DeJoria, CEO of the Paul Mitchell Hair Products Company, Yvonne Chouinard, founder of Patagonia, and Steve Wynn, Las Vegas hotel and casino operator. Watson quipped, with James Bond, the President, and Batman on my side, how can I lose? At the end of his talk, Watson invited me to come with him to Antarctica as a journalist, and I accepted. Chapter 3. The Farley Mowat. December 5, 2005. The Australian customs official at the Melbourne airport looked up for the first time since scanning my passport and paperwork. "You're staying in Australia a couple of days, not sure?" "Right. What does that mean?" "Well, several days, probably." "Local address the Farley Mowat. Never heard of it." "It's a ship." "What kind of ship?" "It belongs to the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. It's a conservation ship." A flicker of suspicion. "Like Greenpeace, is it?" "No, sir, not exactly." It would not be prudent to tell this official that Sea Shepherd made Greenpeace look like Sunday school, or that several sovereign nations, including Norway and Japan, as well as the U.S. National Fisheries Institute, had leveled charges of piracy against Sea Shepherd and its officers. The Norwegian Navy had depth-charged and badly damaged the Society's last ship. The Soviet Navy, when there was one, had once come within seconds of machine-gunning a Sea Shepherd crew into the Bering Sea. Only the miraculous appearance of a gray whale surfacing and blowing between the ships had diffused the situation. What, then, exactly? "Have you seen Jacques Cousteau?" The man's eyes did not move. The tip of his tongue touched the corner of his mouth. He was wavering between getting mean and deciding to enjoy himself. He waited. It was a bad analogy anyway. Watson was about as far from the benign grandfatherly Cousteau as you could get. Cousteau loved people. Watson once said that the life of a human being is worth less than the life of a worm. Time and again he had offered up his own life and the lives of his crew in defense of a whale. He had written, "The pyramids, the old masters, the symphony, sculpture, architecture, film, photography, all of these things are worthless to the earth when compared with any one species of bird or insect or plant." The officer waited. "I'm on assignment for National Geographic Adventure," I said. "I'm covering the Sea Shepherd campaign against the Japanese whaling fleet in Antarctica." Truth has a certain resonance. The man's face softened. That sounds pretty interesting. His right hand went to the stamp. "Antarctica, eh?" he said, handing me back my passport. "Be careful." The taxi turned onto the street that ran along the wharf just at the foot of New Melbourne. All around the harbor, skyscraper condos were going up. There, tied up to the dock in the bright sun, between piers covered with the umbrellas of bars and restaurants, was a black hulk of a ship with a Jolly Roger flapping lazily from her bow. The scull was inset with a circling whale and dolphin, and instead of crossed bones there were a shepherd's staff and a triton. The Farley Mowat, while only 1/3 the length of the factory ship she would be hunting, and 1/10 the tonnage, was still over half a football field long. She radiated both nobility and menace. She was completely black, stem to stern. The only color was a nod to PR, the yellow letters on the side that said seashepherd.org. She was low-slung forward of the bridge superstructure, where the main deck held 3 fast Zodiacs, inflatable outboard motorboats, and 2 jet skis in their cradles. From the main deck the bow swept up to a gracefully rounded bludgeon of black steel. The hull was ice-reinforced, meaning strong enough to push through moderately thick ice and ideal for ramming. water cannons bristled off the bow and the helicopter deck, which was a steel second level added over the aft deck. The cannons were there to prevent boarding. When I arrived at the dock, the ship was crawling with crew, all dressed in black T-shirts. Knots of tourists and visitors milled on the pier and stared. The immediate impression of the Farley was a ship of war. Whatever intentions her owners had when she was built in Norway in the summer of 1956, whatever fishing fleet pedigree was still expressed in her stout lines, she had been transformed by use. She had been reshaped by the will of her present captain. The Farley was a dedicated fighter. Not like any regulation Navy ship, though, she had the maverick, menacing air of a privateer. No wonder the Japanese Institute of Cetacean Research had announced as the whaling fleet left Shimonoseki Harbor on November 8 that they were afraid of an attack by the Sea Shepherd. The Farley was incongruous amid the prosperous bustle of the piers, the shiny condos and cafes. 2 pickups with pallets of sacked food and pickle buckets pulled up to the gangplank amidships. Another truck backed up, and 3 construction workers in union shirts got out and waited to talk with a skinny crew member on the wharf who was cupping his hands around a cell phone at his ear. He seemed to be the one in charge, so I lugged my duffels over the pavement and waited to introduce myself. As I stood in the drubbing sun and inhaled the dense, intoxicating smells of harbor, of salt, rot, tar, diesel, my eyes wandered over the tough ship that would be home for the next month. The long black arm of the port davit, or crane, swung over the main deck and was being hooked to a rope harness on the port zodiac. A young woman with wild curly blonde hair who wore tattered greasy khaki shorts yelled orders from a raised platform that held the davit controls. She looked about 19. At the wheel of the Zodiac stood a strong kid with black athletic glasses and long red dreadlocks under a tied bandana. When he hopped up onto the inflated tube to catch the hook, I noticed that he had a fir tree tattooed on each calf. Next to him in the center Zodiac, getting a harness ready, was a guy in a military buzz cut talking into a radio strapped to his shoulder. He was in full black SWAT gear, cargo pants, black boots, and a tight military utility vest that held radio, knife, flashlight, and a dozen pockets. On the tall superstructure, beneath the varnished gloss of fresh black paint and bubbles of rust, was the faint outline of columns of small figures. They were stenciled skulls and crossbones, and beneath them were the names of ships I recognized, Isba I and Isba II, the Sierra, the Senate and Morilde, the litany of ships rammed and sunk. I counted 15 in neat cemetery rows, like the kills on the fuselage of an ace, a pentimento of scalps. "You the National Geographic guy?" I turned. Another crew member. He had a deep tan, broad shoulders, pronounced cheekbones, and the grave eyes of a wolf. He had grease smeared on his neck and another military haircut, a high and tight, popular with special forces. "Yeah, hi. Let me show you your cabin." He hefted the duffels like they were 2 pillows. I followed him to the edge of the dock, where he jumped across a 2-foot gap and through an open gate in the bulwarks or rail of the main deck. He turned left, aft, through the main hatch in the base of the superstructure, which led into a long, narrow hallway leading farther astern. He took a sharp right and dropped down a set of steep steps into the bows of the ship beneath the main deck. Another companionway lit by fluorescent ceiling lights. Immediate press of close heat and mold, cut with the astringent sweetness of diesel fumes. 1, 2 cabin doorways on the right, he pushed through a red curtain and swung the duffels onto the bunk. Someone else's gear was already on it. "Steve." He shook my hand with a crushing grip. "I'll have Geert move his stuff." "You ex-military?" 101st Airborne." "Where?" "Korea mostly. We patrolled the DMZ." "Was that tough?" The wolf eyes studied me for a second. He wasn't used to being asked a bunch of questions. He hesitated. Yeah, we never really got warm. The mission of my division was die in place, to delay and engage the North Koreans in case of attack. That's what the men called it, die in place. Steve vanished. I thought of the samurai mantra before battle. You are already dead. Anybody who believed that would be a tough adversary. A moment later, a tall, gangly biker with a bushy dark beard and leather vest tumbled into the tiny cabin. On the official crew manifest, Geert Vons was listed as ship's artist. Smiling over his beard, he gathered up an armful of battered pack, one dirty blanket and pillow, and a sketch pad, and tumbled out again. A few minutes later, I saw him on the dock. He was a tattoo artist in Amsterdam. He worked above the Hells Angels bar and drove a motorcycle all year, through the Dutch winter that occasionally froze the canals. He had completed a degree in Chinese and was now doing research with a Chinese scientist on the Baiji dolphins of the Yangtze River. He created illustrated children's books on marine wildlife. He seemed like an unlikely Hells Angel associate. This was Geert's third campaign with Sea Shepherd. He had been on the last fruitless Antarctica campaign in the winter of 2002, when the Farley had patrolled the ice edge for a month and never laid eyes on a Japanese ship. We watched a knot of Japanese tourists reading the public education placard at the foot of the gangplank and then remarkably dropped some money into the blue plastic whale. An older crew member was leading a line of high school volleyball players in red jumpers and plaid skirts onto the ship, and I heard him say, "We are not a protest organization. We are empowered by the UN Charter for Nature to uphold international conservation law." Huh? No, those are not guns, they are water cannons. One of the Union guys called out to the skinny officer, "Where you want the welding rod, mate?" I noticed that his shirt said Electrical Trade Union, if you don't fight, you lose. I asked Geert about the cannons. They can't put too much pressure in them because the pipes are still quite old, but for effect it's still quite good. The pipes wouldn't hold the pressure because they were rusted out, because the ship was 50 years old and was being run by an organization on a shoestring. The hull, the bottom, is that rusty too? Last March on the SEAL campaign, the hull had a strong leak. The two bilge pumps couldn't catch up. It was off the ice, Newfoundland. She might have gone down. Alex dived down with a wood like a carrot and plugged it. They found the bottom was all scattered with rust spots, thin like paper. They patched everything in Jacksonville, he said benevolently, patting me on the back. Geert went off to his day job illustrating the logbook up in the chart room. The crew had dropped 2 of the Zodiacs into the harbor and used the knuckle boom, the central crane, to open the steel doors to the fish hold beneath the deck. The kid with the tree tattoos was tearing around in the inner harbor in the smaller Zodiac, but the larger boat wouldn't start. A tall, large-boned young woman with black hair down to her waist explained that they had flipped it going into Pitcairn. Out of the fish hold they were now hoisting the oddest contraption. The thing looked like a Monty Python creation, 2 parts engine and fan blade, 1 part rubber dinghy. A hulking man with buzzed gray hair and heavy steel glasses limped around the opening yelling orders in a twangy tenor. He caught his breath. What is that? FIB, Flying Inflatable Boat. It flies? The man smiled tolerantly. It has wings. 36-foot span, ho? The blonde pulled back on a lever and the FIB thing dangled. The man squinted at it. I'm an ultralight pilot. They sent me down to Florida to get familiarized with it. I learned how difficult it is to water taxi. The hardest part is getting it out of here and on the water. He talked in a rush and then stopped abruptly. He peered up at the machine. Theoretically, I should be able to handle bigger seas, and the helicopter can handle a lot more wind, have to land and take off on the water. When there's enough wind for me to take off from the deck, it's too windy to fly.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?